Prop 64, opened up cannabis for medical and recreational use. The actual implementation of Prop 64 has been rather uneven. And we've seen, cannabis products available in some communities and not in others. Our special guest speaker today is Brian Applegarth of the California Cannabis Tourism Association. Brian is a cannabis subject matter expert and educator, and he has led the advancement of cannabis travel and tourism in California and really around the US. He's also created the Cannabis Trail, which is a nonprofit organization that he will tell us about. So Brian will kind of update us on cannabis-related matters and share his expertise for how we might continue to learn about cannabis as we travel around the state. So I would ask you to remain muted during Brian's presentation and submit any questions you have through the chat room. And then periodically, Brian will pause and we'll have an opportunity to ask him our questions. So Brian Applegarth, welcome to Sir Branch 8. So Ron, if you could stop sharing and Brian will begin sharing.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. It's great. This is an audience that I don't usually present for. I do a lot of work in the travel industry as kind of the cannabis guy in the room. I've been doing that for about 5 years, 5 to 6 years. And I think I wanted to start out with just sharing a little bit more about who I am for context. And then I pulled up 3 or 4 different slide decks that I've used over the last couple of years that I thought we could walk through. And I really want to make time to answer questions because there's a lot of questions these days about hemp, about cannabis, about CBD, about THC, and about all the other therapeutic elements of the cannabis plant, which really we have co-evolved with as a species up until 1937. We live in this really unique window, which we're going to understand a little bit better after today, because we're going to look at the history of cannabis and culture around the world and how it's been a tool, everything from sustainability and hemp rope to help domesticate horses to cannabis products of today, which is like a whole new evolution that's happened, and it's rapidly evolving and innovating. And I would challenge all of you to kind of be really open-minded and ready for some new information, because the cannabis and hemp plant unlocking and becoming more accessible for more research, more innovation. It's really been an amazing trajectory to watch. So really, just so you guys understand context, I was born and raised in California, grew up traveling, used pot in high school a little bit, but I played a lot of sports. So wasn't a heavy user at all or a heavy consumer. And then I came back to California after living and traveling around the world for years and walked into a dispensary for the first time. And I couldn't believe that this was how far cannabis had come since I had left the state to do what I was doing. So it was really obvious to me that cannabis and travel were going to collide, and there was opportunity there. So just a few things. I sit on the board of the California Travel Association. I'm the chair of their Cannabis Tourism Committee. I also, of course, founded the California Cannabis Tourism Association, which actually just rebranded as the Cannabis Travel Association International. And I do a whole bunch of other stuff, but really I'm here to serve you today. Before we jump into these decks, I'd really like to make room right now up front to answer any pressing questions. If anyone wants to hop off mute and ask any questions they have, let's just dive right in. And then when we can give 10 minutes to that up front. Is there anyone that has any questions out of the gate about cannabis in any way, shape, or form?
I do have one.
Sure.
I do have one, and that is just in terms of safety, whatever. Are there any groups that are advised not to take cannabis? Is it have ill effects for any particular groups, like with heart problems or anything at all?
Yeah. So good question. There are groups that they don't really advocate to not take cannabis. They more advocate to be aware that cannabis can modulate your body. So if you are on pharmaceuticals, if you are on a specific regimen, cannabis does affect your system like anything you eat or drink. So the ability to understand how cannabis works with your body biologically is something important, and you should be able to consult your doctor about this and have discussions with them. Unfortunately, because cannabis was prohibited in 1937, a lot of the doctors today they don't have the knowledge of what cannabis is and how exactly it works, and so there's that gap because this has just come out of prohibition, as of 2018 in California. That being said, there's been thousands and thousands and thousands of studies done, and cannabis is a benign herb. It's grown naturally. We have a lot of things that we eat, drink, and consume daily, including pills that many would argue are much worse for your body than a natural plant, whether you're smoking it or whether you're eating it or whether you're putting it in a health shake in the morning. Cannabis is a power green. There's a lot of, even if you eat the leaf off the plant, a lot of people believe that this will be in grocery stores in 5 to 10 years from now, right next to the kale, because that's how many therapeutic benefits are in the plant. Also, the raw plant is not psychoactive. So when you actually put a cannabis leaf in your morning shake, you're getting all the therapeutic properties of it with zero altering effects, because the only time that a cannabis becomes psychoactive is when you heat it up. So whether you're eating an edible or whether you're smoking a joint, excuse me one second, the cannabis becomes psychoactive as the heat ramp goes up. So like even THC, which is known for being the psychoactive component of cannabis, when it's in the plant version, it's THC acid, and it's not psychoactive in any way, and it's as anti-inflammatory as CBD. So it's a very young, to answer your question, and to be able to take cannabis properly, I would talk to your doctor and make sure that you're taking all things into consideration, with acknowledging that this is a growing kind of information source and a growing niche.
So there's no analogy, like people who take peanuts, so you have that shock that you can go into. Certain people, it's just not for. There's nothing like that with cannabis.
No, I think there's outliers, absolutely. Just like people get stung by bees, right? So there's people that have allergic reactions to things. Cannabis, there are going to be people that have effects that are not exactly, there's going to be dangers for certain demographics of the population, whether it's eating a seafood or bee stings, and cannabis is the same in that. So, there are people there are some groups that work to create awareness around, the risks of cannabis for the outliers that have issues with that. That's not my area of expertise, but those groups do exist. I think if you Google kind of negative impacts of cannabis or, cases where, there's some kind of adverse effect, I know that there's overconsumption of cannabis, people that, it's also outlier cases, but people that use it consistently in very high amounts, usually people who are treating, chronic illnesses or PTSD, or just ridiculous pain that is chronic pain that they deal with daily. You need to be aware of your endocannabinoid system, which we'll get into. We have an entire system in our body that is dedicated to working with the cannabis plant that co-evolved with that kind of, with the plant itself. But it can be oversaturated if you use too high amounts of it as well. So there's definitely groups that work to educate people on this. And there's more and more research being done now that it's become more legal. It makes those barriers come down where meaningful research can start happening.
So what's the tie-in with the travel industry? Is this to visit the hemp fields or to visit the shops, or what's the association there?
Yeah, so the Cannabis Travel Association, our goal is to really steward safe and responsible cannabis-related tourism. So it's everything from education to advocacy to networking. Those are our three pillars: is education, advocacy, and networking. So the reason that we created this association was to serve that and really serve safe and responsible cannabis related experiences, to be a resource for the travel industry and the cannabis operators in the cannabis industry that value the visitor economy or the travel economy, which is not every cannabis operator. So the way that we really look at it from an association point of view is that each destination has a travel ecosystem. It's everything from rental car companies to attractions like Disneyland to hotels to destination marketing organizations like SF Travel or Visit Palm Springs. And what we do is we try to create education, networking opportunities, as well as support in guiding legislation and advocating for enabling legislation to help make cannabis tourism and travel normalized, safe, and responsible. And that also includes Cannabis 101 education, not even consuming the plant, just going to a dispensary to learn because you're interested in having a unique experience and you value education and being informed. It also includes cannabis tour companies, not necessarily consumption. A lot of people like to learn about the history and culture and what are the different types of cultivars or varietals of cannabis. They want to learn about the California cannabis appellations that are starting to be formed in California this year. We're going to have our first cannabis appellations of California being established by July this year. So, and then of course you have CBD massages where people are taking massages with CBD because of the therapeutic effects of it. And then it goes all the way up to the kind of the different types of cannabis tourism, which we'll get into, but it's very wide and it's very diverse. And we really look at how is hemp and cannabis and CBD going to integrate into the travel industry and the travel economy globally, which accounts for 10.3% of the global GDP. So what are the impacts? Everything from risk mitigation to revenue opportunities, and how can we provide education, networking, and advocacy support for cannabis-related travel?
I visited a couple of shops pre-pandemic, one down in Monterey area and one up in Mendocino. Mm-hmm. They are, for the first time in, I was looking for salve for arthritis. They're not the friendliest place to walk into. We were in a holding room, so to speak, and then one or two at a time in the room with an armed guard. I mean, so you don't feel, maybe that has changed, but I haven't been back since pandemic. But it's not the easiest place to go into, and it's not real welcoming to somebody who's unfamiliar with it. I don't know if it's changed or has changed.
No, Ron, you're encouraging me to pull up my first deck, which I have a company called Cultivar Strategies. And what that company is exactly what you're hitting on right now. We actually work with destinations to identify the dispensaries or retailers or lounges that give that welcoming hospitality experience. And we help to develop them and bring them into the travel ecosystem as a preferred partner with the hotels, and they become the cannabis attraction of the destination. So somebody like you can walk in and feel very comfortable. They know you're visiting from a hotel, and it feels like a normalized travel experience. That's exactly what my company does. So, let's go ahead and go through the first deck, and then we'll pause again. And we can answer more questions, okay? So on that note, this is, let me know if you guys can see that.
Yes.
Okay, so this is the shortest deck. We have a bunch of these decks, but this is the hard hitting, like what do we do as Cultivar Strategies? And just so you gentlemen know, I built this company over all of the learnings of the past 5 years. I've worked with hotels, I've worked with destinations, I've worked with tour companies. I educated the San Francisco MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art. I've worked with SF Travel. I've worked with the Fairmont. So I've at the Farmhouse in Sonoma County, which is one of the top 3 luxury bed and breakfasts in the United States. So this company was built on all of that knowledge, and we are a solutions company, a cannabis-related travel solutions company for destinations. And really what we do is we specialize in cannabis-related travel. We reach the cannabis travel segment, which is a whole audience that exists in the United States, and we'll get to that data in a second. But it's a luxury audience. They're high spend, all the economic drivers that really make them valuable, they have. We help educate and mitigate risk. We also do data-driven destination strategy on what is the cannabis brand of your destination. Is it wellness? Is it cannabis lounges? Is it Appellations? Is it something else? And then we go in and we create a travel guide. So we go in a destination, we work with cannabis operators that are hospitality ready and help bring them up to that level if they're not, so they can serve people like the gentleman that just spoke earlier. And then we also bring in other partners. And let me explain this for a second. So the way we look at cannabis is a tool for enhancing activities and experiences. With the right dose of cannabis or the right consumption approach of cannabis, you can make art more vibrant. You can make music sound sweeter. You can make food taste better. So cannabis and travel is actually an enhancement tool for destinations to be elevated with the right intentional kind of approach with consumption. And then what we do is we create a digital Cannapass, because the whole world runs on technology these days, it seems like. And they basically go on a gamified version of that, checking in at different locations and capturing all the data behind it. And then we provide reporting to destinations of how this kind of program performed, what was the economic impact, et cetera. And really, this is the benefit destinations get, right? They have partnerships, marketing, differentiation, intelligence about cannabis and the cannabis traveler. And we really approach destinations from a holistic point of view. So when we come in to do a cannabis strategy, we look at the destination marketing organization. We look at all the hotels, which often are the funding source of the marketing strategy for a destination. And then we work with attractions, government, deliveries, consumption lounges, restaurants, all of them, to tie together a cannabis experience and program for the destination that will attract the cannabis motivated travel audience that our research has identified. We did national research on the cannabis travel audience in partnership with a company called MMGY Travel Intelligence. And we discovered that 18% of all adult Americans and 29% of the active leisure travel audience of the United States are cannabis motivated travelers. They make their traveling decisions based on the ability to access cannabis experiences and activities, including CBD massages and whatnot. So real quick, I'm not going to go through every line here, but this is all the different solutions that we bring to the table to help normalize cannabis. We develop a cannabis travel guide. And then this is kind of what that looks like, which is, what is the profile data, state laws, tips and tricks, cannabis 101 education. How do you deal with a guest that's had too much, that's over altered? We're giving these assets and these risk mitigation tools, as well as revenue opportunities. We have preferred partners we work with where people can buy a CBD lotion to put on the shelf in the lobby, and they can make incremental revenue, which is a big, important point for hospitality operators. And basically we have a 100-day roadmap where we onboard a destination, we do strategy for them, we do itinerary curation, and then we develop toolkits. We train on those toolkits after we distribute them, of course, throughout the destination. And then we launch the Cannapass program, the travel guide with the Cannapass that's digitized. And then we help market that through our partners. And then we monitor all the kind of movement and data behind that pass, as well as do seasonal strategy and bespoke events and a few other things. So anyways, I just wanted to give you guys a quick glimpse into what my work entails day to day these days. The other project that we have is
Brian, before you move on, could I just ask you a question related to that?
Yeah, please, Steve.
So one of your slides touched on state laws and transporting product.
Sure.
And so let's say you stop into one of these destinations, you pick up a CBD cream, you pick up some food items or something like that, and you're going to get on an airplane or cross state lines or even travel internationally. What do you recommend?
So don't travel internationally, because you don't want to travel over state lines either. So when you have a cannabis product, you want to stay in state, you want to not fly, And you want to also avoid using that in federal parks as well, because federally it's still illegal. So it's more sensitive if you're actually using cannabis in a federal park. And those are the kind of the 3 tips that I would say you have to be aware of when it comes to buying and consuming cannabis. There are limits, like you can only have 28.5 grams at one time on you, or 8 grams of concentrates. Unless somebody in this room is a heavy user, I wouldn't worry about that. Those are decent size limits. You know, the typical person has much less than that. So you're allowed to transport that. If you're driving in your car, you're supposed to keep the products closed and in the trunk, kind of like alcohol. Yeah, so those are the tips I would give you as far as staying compliant and kind of avoiding risk when it comes to having cannabis and transporting it, or just carrying it with you. You know, we call it possession, like right to possess and transport. And basically, you know, the law states that you're able to have pretty good amounts, 28.5 grams or 8 grams of concentrates. If you have your medical cannabis card of the state of California, you're able to carry as much as you need. And there's a lot of people with that because they're treating cancer, they're treating chronic pain, and they take much heavier doses of cannabis to try to treat that. One thing that's coming to light too is treatment of prostate cancer with cannabis suppositories and doing really targeted application. Cannabis has some pretty unique therapeutic effects that it facilitates naturally, which is very exciting when it comes to, you know, plant-based medicines.
So one more question is,
Sure.
You talked about dispensaries. So how can we be sure that we're going into a dispensary where we're getting safe and quality product?
So there's a website that you can go to where you can actually search for dispensaries to make sure that they have their license. And the key about that is if they have their license, it means that all their products are going through the supply chain. And that's where you know the efficacy is going to be high. And let me speak to that for a minute. That's a great question. So you can search on that website. I will say that you might go, I think 9 out of 10 dispensaries give really poor service, especially to people that are newer to cannabis. It's you know, they're selling the highest THC flower to the kind of stoner people that use it all the time. And that's kind of the old demographic that's already built in. So, you know, I would do research and try to find a dispensary, and I'm happy to provide you guys with a follow-up here of a couple of recommendations if you want, of dispensaries in different areas. I can also include that link to be able to search for a retail shop that you trust. There's also the delivery option. You know, I have a company that I have a couple deliveries that I think are fantastic. Now the testing tier, let's go into that. So efficacy is huge. Do not buy your CBD or any cannabis. Dude, don't buy any CBD products even from gas stations or, you know, just regular shops. You know, a lot of times you want to get CBD products even in a dispensary because they go through this very rigorous testing tier where you also typically know that they have a full spectrum of therapeutic properties, but that they've passed the testing tier of the supply chain, which is parts per billion. It's actually some of the most rigorous testing that any food or consumable product goes through, maybe one of the highest in our country. You know, I've heard people say before that, you know, they want to really elevate even the testing of our food products to what cannabis products are. You know, you can't go into Whole Foods right now and buy an apple that would pass that test of parts per billion. But you can go in a dispensary and buy that because that's the efficacy and testing tier of the cannabis industry, which is setting a whole new level. So yeah, go into a dispensary, buy your products there, including your CBD products. I would encourage you to buy your CBD products there as well.
I have a question.
Sure.
So in some cities, they only do delivery.
Yep.
And are they under the same rules as the dispensary would be?
They are. Yep, they absolutely are. So deliveries in California, so everybody knows, California deliveries can deliver statewide. And the reason for that was there was some pushback from municipalities that were very anti-cannabis retail. And there's a lot of patients that need it. And not being able to have access to that is sometimes, you know, problematic, let's say. So it was decided about a year or two ago that legally, the state of California made cannabis deliveries legal statewide. So any delivery is able to build their model and operations to be able to serve patients around the state.
And Ron, what was the website you mentioned that we could go to check which ones are licensed?
I can put that in the chat here if you'd like. BCC. Okay, and so when you go and look at a website of any retail shop, you'll see a license number, and just you put the license number in this link and it will tell you if they're licensed and if they're in good standing, etc. So I just dropped that in the chat.
Ron, have you done any work with the cruising world?
You know, it's interesting you asked that. I've actually been on I had 2 calls in the last 30 days with cruises and just talking about, you know, how can they capitalize and prepare for this? So very early stages, Ken, but they're starting to see how do we attract this audience and how do we prepare?
I think that would be cool. You know, you have 10,000 bars on a ship. It'd be nice to have a couple marijuana bars.
Yeah, right. And just to your point, Ken, these marijuana bars you're talking about, this day and age, you wouldn't know it. It looks pretty. Some of these places look the same as a tap room. It's all drinkables. It's not smoking. You go in there and you can get either a non-alcoholic or a non-THC beverage, a 2% or IPA or a 2% cannabis beverage, a 5% cannabis beverage, or a 15%, just like alcohol content. So that whole spectrum of drinkables that you're talking about bar, cannabis is the exact same experience now. In some of these locations where it's not a smoking lounge, it is a bar. It's a cannabis bar with all the different options.
Thanks, Ron.
And Brian, that chat address went very quickly off the screen. Could you share it again?
Sure.
It should be in the group chat,
Oh, okay.
Ron. If you check the
My
group chat.
daughter introduced us to weed oil, and every time I hurt something, a shoulder, a knee, whatever, I spray on this weed oil, and it doesn't always work. But when it does work, it is magic. And we all have aches and pains at our age. And if you play sports, whack a few golf balls or whatever, tennis balls, this is something that, thanks to my daughter, I would highly recommend as pain relief. Yeah.
Thanks, Nat. Yeah. And we're going to get into the biology of this shortly. And you guys and people will start to understand why cannabis is effective and why it is effective in so many ways. It's been honored as a medicinal plant and one of the most powerful medicinal plants on earth for centuries. And we live in a very specific window where it was taken out of our diet, really, as a species. So just so you gentlemen understand, a lot of the education I do, I call fact-based education. This is all about discoveries, facts, milestones, things that speak to hemp and cannabis that are, people can draw their own conclusions. I just try to present timelines. And on that note, why don't we hop into that if you guys would like, and we'll kind of go into that historical kind of section. All right, let me know when you guys can see this.
Good.
All right, so, the earliest known documentation is, 2900 BC China. And that's where cannabis can be first traced back to. And this is where a lot of people believe cannabis kind of originated out of, was the Tibetan Plateau. And it was a popular medicine, and it was really known for its yin and yang properties, which is really about balance. It's about stability and balance and keeping your body into optimum balance and your mind and your spirit in balance. So cannabis as a medicinal application, you want to think about it works to balance your body, your mind, your body, your spirit. That's what it's been used as for centuries. and it was known for the yin and yang balancing properties. And in Chinese, the word cannabis or ganja is ma, M-A. And in the Chinese language, the shorter the word, the more ancient the word. So cannabis was one of these ancient medicines going back in China in 2900 BC. In 1213 BC, we discovered that cannabis pollen was found in some tombs of the mummy Ramesses II, who died in 1213 BC. And there's numerous ancient texts from Egypt that have reference to the cannabis plant. And they used cannabis in documented ways for hemorrhoid pain, sore eyes, as well as other conditions. And it was found on other mummies after that. So cannabis was used in Egypt, and that's another kind of cultural case study of cannabis being present. If you go to India, cannabis was used in India starting at around 1000 BC in a drink called bhang, B-H-A-N-G. And it's essentially was this kind of milk tea drink that was a staple. So it was an infused milk called bhang as medicine, and it was used for medicinal, but also religious reasons in ancient India. The psychoactive property of the plants was recognized, and they also treated ailments with it. Aches and pains, insomnia, as well as gastrointestinal disorders. But also here in India, we really kind of start looking into the lifted consciousness, and they call it an entheogen, which is basically a plant that helps us connect with the divine. And the divine is something that we can't see, whether it's a God, a spirit, it's this kind of concept of connecting with something greater than ourselves. And this was where we really start seeing it in India in 1000 BC. In Africa, you see between 1300 and 1400. It could be traced back to Ethiopia. A lot of kind of medicinal plant-based cultures using cannabis, as well as trading and bartering with it. Some ways they used it is they would chew on cannabis leaves, and then they eventually realized they can smoke it. And one of the first cannabis pipes really comes out of the African region. And then we jump forward to 1492 to 1619, right? Jamestown, the founding of our country. So Christopher Columbus brought cannabis in the form of hemp rope to America in 1492. There are theories that, there's a group called the Scythians, and a lot of people, they were kind of a nomadic tribe that was way prior to this, but this is what I was talking about hemp rope earlier. Some people attribute cannabis being turned into hemp rope as building a tool that allowed us to domesticate horses. And the Scythians did that. And they were able to travel and having on horseback. And so anyways, fast forwarding, you have Christopher Columbus coming to cannabis with hemp in the form of rope. But a lot of people credit the settlers of Jamestown for bringing it in 1611. And it was incredibly important. All of the settlers in Jamestown were actually required by law to grow cannabis or hemp, same plant, different varietals, in 1619. And you could also pay your taxes, believe it or not, in hemp. It was a way that you could, so a lot of people say our country was built on kind of the hemp plant. In 1851, cannabis was added to the U.S. Pharmacopoeia, which is the official medical journal of the United States. And it was in there starting in 1851, and it was largely used as a medical application in the form of tinctures. And at the turn of the century, there were over 20 different over-the-counter applications of cannabis medicines and other herbal medicines to treat your well-being and ailments. So it was admittedly part of the third edition of the U.S. Pharmacopoeia. And then in 1942, it was removed after Prohibition, which set in 1937 through a tax act. And then it remained in the medical pharmacopoeia of the U.S., and then it was removed shortly thereafter. And then in 2003, the federal government actually filed a patent on cannabis as a neuroprotectant and as an antioxidant. So the United States, I believe it was which one was it? It was it was the federal government filed a medical patent in 2003. So so that exists, which kind of shows that cannabis is in its nature a tool for wellness and applied medically. In this case, they filed the patent around cannabinoids as antioxidants and neuroprotectants. So looking at that timeline to the right, let me speak to those really quick. So in 1978, there was a program started called the Federal IND Program. And this was for patients around the US that had terminal illnesses, and they received a can of joints from the government every year to be able to treat glaucoma as well as other ailments. And this just got discontinued recently, but since 1978, there's actually been a federal program that's been administered for cannabis as a medical application to a suite of patients. In 1992, the endocannabinoid system was discovered in Israel by a doctor named Dr. Raphael Mechoulam, and he is one of the leaders of research in cannabis biology today. And we're going to get into the endocannabinoid system. That's the system I was telling you all about that we all have internally that works directly with cannabis. And we'll get into that in a minute. And then, of course, in 2018, cannabis became adult use legal. But since 1996, cannabis has been medically legal in California. So we're coming up on 30 years here in a few years on the medical industry and how that existed. And now it's also adult use, which is anybody 21 and up can buy and consume cannabis. And probably one of the most important recent developments is that in 2020, last year during the pandemic, the cannabis industry earned, rightfully so, the essential designation because people use it in so many ways to manage their health and wellness and medically. And while the travel industry in my world kind of tanked and came to a standstill, cannabis sales raged. We have more users, more consumers. CBD and cannabis sales went through the roof during the pandemic because people were using it as a medicine to cope with the environment that they were dealing with. All right. So this is a kind of a glimpse into the endocannabinoid system. So the endocannabinoid system is responsible for regulating and balancing many processes in our body, including immune response, communication between cells, appetite and metabolism, memory, and more. Cannabis has a lot of therapeutic properties and it treats our wellness in a lot of ways. And the reason why is because the endocannabinoid system is the master modulator of all your other systems. So when something's not working right, in whether it's your immune system, whether it's your reproductive system, whether it is your skeletal system, cannabis is the macro overarching system that helps to regulate your body and bring it back into balance. So it kind of turns the knobs up and down to help bring your body back into optimum performance level, or homeostasis, they call it, which is really interesting when you think about the properties of yin and yang from ancient China and how they attributed cannabis to balance, because that's exactly what homeostasis is and what the endocannabinoid system works toward. Now, there's two receptors in our body that make up the endocannabinoid system. You have the CB1 receptors, which is motor activity, thinking, coordination, appetite, memory, pain perception. And then the CB2 ones are a lot in the gut and the kidneys and the pancreas, right? They work on bone and tumors and eye. So this is also cardiovascular health. So we have two different receptors that are in our bodies that are part of the endocannabinoid system. And you can see there's a lot in your brain and your head, as well as down in your gut and throughout your entire body, really. So the importance of this is cannabis can really serve your wellness, and the cannabis properties, the cannabinoids and the terpenes and the flavonoids. These are little sciencey, but those are all kind of the medicinal components of cannabis. They work to bring your body back into balance. So that goes into cannabis compounds. And then after this, I'm going to pause and take questions. So when you look at cannabis compounds, there's really three kind of key concepts I want to depart. The first one is the middle graph, which is cannabinoids. And you see you have CBD, and you see a list of all the things that CBD does. It's antibacterial, it's neuroprotective, right? That goes back to that medical patent that was filed, neuroprotectant, right? It promotes bone growth, it reduces inflammation. This is why you hear so much about CBD, because it's very present in the plant and it treats so many things, right? The other cannabinoids that you see are CBDA, CBG, CBGA, CBC. There's 140 or more different cannabinoids in the plant. So you have CBD, and then you have THC, which can get you high if you heat it up and consume it. And then you have 138 other cannabinoids that you haven't probably heard about a lot of these yet, but you will. The next one you're going to really hear a lot about is CBG, and you're going to hear a lot about CBN, which is a sleep promotion cannabinoid. So CBN and CBG will start getting more buzzy in mainstream culture shortly. And you can see that all these cannabinoids, we're unlocking this medicine plant, this ancient medicine plant. We're unlocking how all of these can help promote health. So when you move to the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see terpenes. So another very important thing to understand about cannabis is the terpene profile. Terpenes are found throughout nature, right? You have lavender in lavender plants, right? Which the terpene for lavender is linalool. And cannabis is a flower, and there's a lot of cannabis flowers that have linalool. You have lemons, which have limonene is the terpene profile. Citrusy, right? It wakens you up a little bit. There's a lot of cannabis varietals or cultivars or flowers of cannabis that have a lot of limonene. And when you use that, it's more uplifting, and you're cleaning the house and you're going on a hike, right? Another terpene profile, which is really interesting, is myrcene, which is found in mangoes and a bunch of other things, right? And myrcene actually serves as an appetite stimulant. You know, the munchies we hear a lot about, right? So cannabis, when you eat a cannabis edible, or you use a flower, you vaporize or smoke a flower of cannabis that has high myrcene content, it could be a precursor to a meal, which makes it taste really good, and it's kind of the modern day vermouth, right? It's getting you ready to have a great meal, preparing your digestion system. So what they're finding is that with the cannabinoids, you have all these kind of chemical compounds, and then with the terpenes, it kind of steers the effects. So like, let's say you're using cannabis and you know that you're going to go have a dinner later. The future of cannabis and travel is you're going to use or take a cannabis product or flower that is going to enhance your meal, or you're going to take a cannabis flower that's going to enhance your hike on the coast, or you're using a cannabis flower that's going to promote intimacy. There's some cultivar flowers that are known for stimulating the libido and nurturing that. So, and that all comes down to the terpene profile. So in cannabis, you have THC, which is that kind of altering effect that happens as an entheogen, and you get that high feeling. And then the kind of terpenes that you're using in that flower are going to steer the effects of whether it's an appetite stimulant, it's going to make you horny, or it's going to make you want to go take a nap. Right. So this is the future of cannabis and travel is kind of what I promote. And then the entourage effect is important to understand. You'll see the grid on the right is all about kind of the different effects that cannabis can produce: relaxation, comfort, calm, inspiration, energy, and focus. Now, cannabis at the right level of dose and the right type of product can complement all of these different feelings and therefore enhance activities and experiences. So let me pause there. That was a lot of information in the last 10 minutes.
Brian, we're going to have to wrap this up shortly,
Okay.
but I've learned a lot.
Let me just ask one more question, Ron, before we close.
Questions.
So Brian, I'm glad you showed this slide because, you know, it can get very complicated, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not interested in a kind of the THC effect, you really need to talk to someone in a dispensary or perhaps online who can guide you to the right product for what you're looking for.
You do. And there's all kinds of products. There's all kinds of methods of ingestion. We didn't get to that today, but there's, you know, everything from topicals to, you know, to capsules to lubricants. That, I mean, it's just amazing all the ways that cannabis can be applied. And you should talk to a bud tender. And if you do go to a dispensary, I would ask for somebody on staff that's willing to give the education and talk to somebody who's new to cannabis and be patient, because there's usually at least one person on staff that's willing to take the time without feeling rushed.
Right. Yeah,
Ron,
Brian,
do you
thank
have
you
a
so
list of
much. A wealth of information.
Yeah.
Really appreciate you talking with our group.
Ron, do you have a list of dispensaries in our area?
Yeah, so you guys are all kind of Bay Area based. Is that accurate?
Right.
Yeah, Walnut Creek area.
Yeah, I'll put together a follow-up email by the end of this week, and I'll include some recommendations of retailers as well as deliveries that can really just deliver right to your door.
Ron, I'm sorry, I had one comment I'd just like to make, Brian.
Sure.
That, you know, in terms of the accuracy of your slideshow,
Yep.
I really question your slide on China, 2900 BC. That's largely a legendary period. And I find it hard to believe they were talking about, there's anything from that period talking about yin and yang or anything like that. So I think that attribution is going to be much later. And like I say, that's a legendary period in Chinese history. So I'm just saying, you know, you may want to recheck that as to how you want to present it.
Sure. What's your I'd love to hear your perspective, Ron, on the fact that the word ma is actually descriptive of cannabis and ganja specifically. Is that the same period, or is that something that is separate from that kind of?
I'm not sure. And I was like an Asian studies major. So
Yeah.
anything before like 1700 BC. Now, I'm not up to date on the most recent excavations, but they didn't really have the writing system back then. So there may be evidence, you know, going back like archaeological evidence of its appearance there.
Mhm.
But this whole thing about attributing like yin yang to it, I would think that's a much later period because they didn't really have the writing system even back then. So when I was studying, they had things called oracle bones. That's the earliest record they had of writing. There were like cracks in these bones. There may be some notations on them. So there was no writing system that I know of that early. So I'm just saying.
Ron, we need to.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying they need to relook at that.
Sure. Yeah. No, I'll take a look at it again. Thanks for pointing that out. Appreciate it. And thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it. And I'll send that follow-up email and yeah, you guys have a great week. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Yep.